crafter process come into your discussions about writing? I mean, is it something that you discuss with your writer friends, or that you feel like you have an outlet for, or is it something you don't talk about?
Well, I guess there's two parts to my answer to that. One is when I'm talking to students in schools, I tend to skip past process really quickly, mainly because talking to 7th graders for an hour about the writing project, there's going to be 5 kids in the front who are like rapt and watching, and then boys in the back throwing spitballs at you. So I tend, when I meet with students, to talk mostly about the meat of the material that I'm writing. So in the cases recently, it's been about apes and about international politics. And then just right at the end, kind of drop in more of the writerly bits. And really what I'm trying to do there is just for the few kids who envision themselves as writing being of use to them, or that they might become writers someday, to give them the kind of the emotional seeds of what makes a writer at 13, what writing can do to help you in the rest of your life, but also, and just to plant it there in case they're on the fence and it's going to help them keep pursuing writing. But with younger audiences, I don't really talk about craft that much. I do really emphasize the role of editing, because anyone who's gotten to, their mid-20s, say, and they're still actively pursuing writing realizes how important editing is. But your average 17-year-old is probably writing something and thinking as they're writing it, am I good? Like, this is going to prove, do I have the chops to actually be this thing like a writer? And if they're judging themselves as they're writing, that's their equation that leads to paralysis. That's where you're just reflecting on your own abilities while you're creating a rough draft, which is miserable. So I'm trying to prevent that when I talk to younger audiences, just prevent the people who are too self-critical early on, which I feel like cuts out so many writers, would-be writers, and just makes, and they leave the project too early. So I'm trying to prevent that. When I talk about craft with other YA writers, it's interesting. I've actually noticed it a lot from working at the Fairleigh Dickinson MFA, is that writers of children's and YA talk about the very nuts and bolts, almost rule-based version of craft much more freely than writers of adult literary fiction. And I think we're maybe more closely aligned towards the screenwriters and the TV writers who come up through a system that tells them about act structure and about beats and about tension, in a way that I'm not trying to diminish what you learn in an adult fiction writing workshop, but the idea is that you're getting to truth. And so you're looking at the various paths that an individual project can get to truth, and to talk about, sort of more nuts and bolts issues, maybe too much, is to lose track of the artistry. Whereas in children's and YA, I feel like we're very willing to think about things in terms of the ratios of dialogue and non-dialogue, as far as like what makes the optimal chapter. It just can feel a little bit more like mechanics work, but I love mechanics work. So I like the idea of like being a craftsman, not just an artist. And I think something, because I used to write for adults and now I write for children, that shift has really allowed me to be more of a craftsman and not just looking into the void and seeing what I find,
Would you be comfortable talking about your shift from writing adult fiction or writing for adults, and maybe why you decided or fell into writing for kids?
Yeah, sure.
For young adults, and maybe even, I'm curious as to whether you think that's like a permanent shift or an impermanent shift, or sort of how you even see those genres existing or maybe changing.
Yeah. So my shift from adult to young adult is also my becoming a real person at the same time. So it's hard to extract, just me being 24 versus me being 34 from what it means to be an adult writer and what it means to be a YA writer. I know very few people who have started in children's literature and moved to writing for adults, but I know many more that have started writing for adults and moved into children's literature. And that's my journey as well. So my first 2 novels were for adults. The first one was called Glamorous Disasters, and it's a very commercial story about a young man tutoring the rich and famous of Fifth Avenue and living in Harlem to pay off his college debt. So it's like a boundary crossing every day when he goes to work, but also, is played for heightened stakes and comedy. It's kind of like a male nanny diaries. And so that was basically, I threw everything into that novel that I could in order to get a book deal. And it worked. The second novel was my sort of dark literary follow-up, which sold tens, if not dozens of copies. And got the probably my worst review of all time. Even though my first novel was panned by Michiko Kakutani in the New York Times, the second novel didn't make the Times. I knew that was going to happen, but also got a Kirkus review that just said at the end, it was just a 1-word sentence. It just said grim. It was talking about its prospects. So I knew I was in a bad place. So I realized I had to do something different, and I was looking at different projects that I could do. And simultaneously, a YA editor named David Levithan asked me out to lunch, and I just talked about YA with him a little bit, and he was talking about what he's written and what he's working on, and I'd long admired his work. And we had a couple more lunches, and then eventually he said, "We have an in-house title, like literally the title of the book, and that's all we'll give you, and would you write the book?" And I was pretty sure I had no more career in adult publishing, so it was a perfect moment to have that. I was like, yes, I can write a book again, I can get published. And the title was The School for Dangerous Girls, and it's a novel about a boarding school for criminal young ladies. And I'm actually really terrible at titles. Like my titles tend to be like long prose poems that have no meaning, but a lot of fun words in them. And so The School for Dangerous Girls, like it's a title that just telegraphs what's going to be in the book, and you're already interested. And so I felt like it was a good title. I didn't think it was a book that I could ever write. To be honest, I had a lot of condescension towards that book. I was thinking maybe under pseudonym, like I don't want this permanently to be on my list of books, is The School for Dangerous Girls, because I was thinking, I'm here to write literature. And I also had a condescension that I wasn't aware of at the time towards young adult, that I had tried it in the adult world, and that I had been demoted from varsity to JV, like adult to young adult. Like it just felt the same. At the same time, it was much better than temping, which is what I was doing before I was writing. So I definitely wanted to write the book. So I wrote what I thought was, and I can see this happen a lot actually when adults move from adult to YA, is that I'm an adult writer writing a YA book. It's going to be so much richer and bigger than the usual young adult drivel, and that was my attitude writing it. And so I felt like I gave room for these sort of like long, what I thought was psychologically penetrating passages exploring characters' psyches in their situations, instead of just having them act and talk to each other, that they would actually have introspection and wisdom to it. And so I turned in my first draft, and David cut all those passages, all those ones that I thought, like, this is what I can bring to the field. I'm going to deepen young adult literature, and he just sliced right through them. And so there was a lot of soul searching about that, and I realized, it made me think about what was the purpose of those passages. What was the purpose of the 1-page or 3-page description of the turning of a moment in the sunset, where the light just caught the profile of a character, and how it reminded someone of their early childhood. Like, why was that in the book? And I would like sputter back to David and I'd make these arguments that, it's there because it shows so much of the tension of the moment, and that these characters have a really dynamic relationship, and that it's visually just striking. And I realized that those were technically reasons, but the real reason those were there was to impress. That I'd put those passages in in order to have the book reflect well on me. And so a lot of my first two books, The School for Dangerous Girls and The Deadly Sister, were about paring away the sort of the narcissism that was in my project of being a writer, that I wanted to write in order to be special. That, like, why live a life in which you weren't special? And that I was writing these things to prove that I was something, you know, that I was more than ordinary. It's not. I understand where I was coming from, but that doesn't make a great book. And it was such a hard lesson, but an important lesson for me as a writer to know, to get to the place where I could shave away my sort of nervous preening, you know, where I was trying to make myself look good, you know, and instead, young adult allowed me to shift to trying to write a good book instead. I thought they were the same thing before, and that it made me realize that they're different.
What do you think about the role of the self then, or the role of the writer or the author as I don't know, as either being meaningful within a culture, or meaningful within historical context, or even just for yourself, like in your process, do you now sort of feel like you have to disappear yourself or become, or do you sort of channel something else or go to a different space, or I don't know.
Yeah. I think for me, the danger in general when I'm writing is that there's going to be too much self in my books. I would venture it's probably the problem for most of us, is that it's both, if you think about it, I mean, you're obviously creating all the words. You've taken something that's blank and empty, and you're producing everything inside it. So all of the subconscious things are going to be there, like the minutia of your word choice, or like the rhythm, the pacing, your natural inclinations as far as towards the bombastic or the calm. That's all going to be in there. And then if you then add, this is a book about a young writer on a journey of self-discovery, then you're setting the boundaries of the frame even closer towards, like, just, this is the sphere around me. I'm going to take you on a journey into me. And if you imagine you're just in a conversation at a bar and someone is doing that same thing in conversation, those are the people you want to, like, throw a drink in their face, you know? It's like, I'm like, well, fuck you. I'm a person too. And I feel like the reader's experience is that they want to feel like they're acknowledged. And obviously you can't directly acknowledge the reader, but you can do it by proving throughout the book that everything is there in order to work towards an end game or a master plan as far as what effect the book is supposed to produce. And the tragedy is if the writer at some point allows the curtain to come away, and then there's just, like, it's like the Wizard of Oz. There's just like an old guy behind a screen, right? That it was secretly all about puffing himself up. So that's where I think the self can get in the way when it's a Wizard of Oz moment. Whereas I think, to continue the Oz metaphor, I think we should be Glinda, you know, like we should be appearing at the important moments and telling the reader, or, you know, in that case, Dorothy, what the path ahead looks like, but not making it all about us. I think there's an arrogance to the project already. Like, we're only writers because we're self-involved, and we have to work against it at all times.